Good morning from the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, and this is your Access and Privacy Online News Summary for Saturday, May 24th. Off the top, a U.S. American hacker pleads guilty in the PowerSchool data breach, while a controversial Trump-backed snitch line raises alarms as it can collect information on Canadians. We also cover significant data breaches and cyber incidents affecting global companies, including a major development concerning your genetic data if you've ever used 23andMe. Finally, we'll preview an upcoming discussion on the troubling state of privacy and access to information in Alberta. Strange days indeed. Let's dive in. First up, a U.S. hacker has pled guilty to charges related to the PowerSchool data breach. This incident compromised sensitive information from thousands of school districts across Canada and the United States, raising serious concerns about student privacy and data security. The charges mark the first time authorities have identified who was responsible for the PowerSchool data breach that appeared to expose the data of tens of millions of children. Meanwhile, in an article that has to be read to be believed, a snitch line in the United States of America continues to allow reporting of Canadians providing gender-affirming care. Gender-affirming care is provided by the BC Provincial Health Services Authority. As a result, TransCare BC has removed clinician names from its website and notified staff about the U.S. initiative as a precaution. As privacy advocates, we recognize this tool could dangerously target Canadian healthcare professionals and patients, further blurring ethical and international privacy lines. And now turning to other Canadian news. From Maggie McIntosh, LGI reporter at the Winnipeg Free Press. A University of Winnipeg employee is calling for an investigation into university leadership under whistleblower protections, highlighting critical concerns around institutional transparency. The report from the employee voices concerns on campus about employee turnover, transparency about current cost-cutting measures, and new rules that censor protests and other activities at U of W. The complaint was filed late last month. The Ombudsman is assessing whether it requires further investigation. Meanwhile, from Mike Stimson, LGI reporter at the Thunder Bay Source, Ontario's Atikokan Native Friendship Centre faces scrutiny over financial transparency, highlighting ongoing governance and accountability issues following the public disclosure of a whistleblower package. There have been requests for a new board to be appointed among allegations of financial misuse, according to an online petition. The Ontario Provincial Police is investigating, but no charges have been laid and the allegations have not been tested in court. In Ottawa, Sports News revealed through access requests, eco-friendly transportation has emerged as a key condition for the new Senators' arena deal, emphasizing sustainability in public-private agreements. Under the agreement, a group led by the NHL team would be responsible for designing, building, and paying for a publicly accessible cycling and pedestrian bridge linking a major Ottawa street to the LeBreton Flats Arena site. In addition, the arena and associated elements would be zero-carbon buildings, highly energy-efficient structures with minimal greenhouse gas emissions from materials and operations. Ontario's autism budget is climbing to $779 million, but advocates question the transparency of funding allocation, pushing for clearer data and accountability as they are left obtaining figures through Freedom of Information requests. Children, Community and Social Services Minister Michael Parse's office has not yet offered details on how the money will be used, but the Ontario Autism Coalition fears it will not all go toward therapy for children. The coalition president says that despite the increase to funding, not much is seen on the user end, and it gets absorbed into system costs rather than reaching families. Next, in continuing coverage through Freedom of Information from Ed Smith, LGI reporter at The Pointer, residents of Oakville remain divided between data proving local safety and their personal feelings of insecurity, underscoring how information perception impacts community trust. A resident's TikTok video detailed what he believes to be a serious public health threat linked to decades-old industrial dump sites and an increased rate of cancer in the Joshua Creek neighborhood. These claims contradict provincial health data, detailing that rates of death due to cancer and per capita diagnosis of the disease show Joshua Creek has considerably lower risk compared to the rest of Oakville and Ontario. Lastly, local councils across Ontario are opting for online, phone, and paper ballots for the next election, reinforcing the critical intersection of technology, accessibility, and voter privacy. Discussions included costs of paper ballots and the added workload for municipal staff, but Councillor Bill Waters provided a viewpoint regarding the right to privacy afforded to each Canadian citizen. Waters said when voting online or on the phone and in front of somebody, you may be intimidated to vote differently than the way you really want to vote. Shifting to the United States, President Trump's approach to record keeping could result in historically minimal documentation, raising concerns about transparency and historic accountability. This is because the Trump administration is scrubbing thousands of government websites of history, legal records, and data it finds disagreeable. On top of that, officials have used apps such as Signal that can auto-delete messages containing sensitive information rather than retaining them for record keeping. They have shaken up the National Archives leadership and even ordered the rewriting of history on display at the Smithsonian Institution. Further complicating transparency, Trump's administration seeks Supreme Court intervention to prevent watchdog access to Department of Justice documents. The Justice Department's latest emergency appeal to the High Court concerns whether DOJ is a federal agency that is subject to the Freedom of Information Act. The administration argues DOJ is merely a presidential advisory body that is exempt from requests for documents under FOIA. A federal judge has blocked Trump's firing of Democratic members of the Privacy Oversight Board, citing concerns about politicizing privacy governance. The ruling from U.S. District Reggie B. Walton ends the lawsuit brought by 2 of the 3 fired board members in February, asking the judge to find that board members can't be fired without cause. Additionally, a judge declared the Trump administration unquestionably violated a court order on deportations, illustrating continued struggles over executive accountability. In an emergency hearing called to address reports that immigrants had been sent to South Sudan, it was found 8 migrants were not given a meaningful opportunity to object that the deportation could put them in danger. And finally, Trump's nominee for the IRS, who previously supported abolishing the agency, faces tough questions, spotlighting ongoing debates about transparency and accountability in federal agencies. The IRS, like other federal agencies, has hemorrhaged employees due to cuts spearheaded by the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOJ, all while the agency churns through acting leaders as it awaits a confirmed one. Internationally, we see multiple stories intersecting privacy and cybersecurity. Off the top, biotechnology giant Regeneron has announced its $256 million acquisition of 23andMe, raising significant privacy concerns about genetic data and consent. The proposed transaction with Regeneron includes 23andMe's personal genome service and total health and research services. It does not include the Lemonade Health subsidiary, a telehealth services provider which 23andMe plans to wind down. Regeneron said it will comply with 23andMe's privacy policies and applicable law. It will also process all customer personal data in accordance with the consents, privacy policies and statements, terms of service, and notices currently in effect, as well as have security controls in place designed to protect such data. Meanwhile, in the United Kingdom, a cyber attack on the legal aid agency has compromised sensitive data from lawyers and their clients, exposing serious vulnerabilities in public sector cybersecurity. The information obtained included criminal records, national insurance numbers, and payment details. The National Crime Agency and the National Cybersecurity Center have been working with the agency since the intrusion. Separately, cryptocurrency platform Coinbase revealed a $20 million ransom demand from hackers who accessed customer data, highlighting the growing threat to financial technology. Coinbase CEO said criminals had bribed some of the company's customer service agents who live outside the United States to hand over personal data on customers, like names, dates of birth, and partial social security numbers. Coinbase did not specify how many customers had their data stolen or fell prey to social engineering scams, but the company did pledge to reimburse any who did. And winding up our global tour this week, UK retailer Marks and Spencer estimates a cyber attack has already cost them $400 million, underscoring the profound financial and operational risks companies face from cybersecurity breaches. The cyber attack stopped the company from processing online orders and left store shelves empty. It was first reported around Easter weekend, with the operational impact expected to continue until July. Wrapping up today's coverage, we look ahead to an upcoming commentary on trouble in Alberta's access and privacy landscape. Recent investigations around the Alberta government is not complying with freedom of information laws, with the Information and Privacy Commissioner confirming significant noncompliance in processing access requests. Additionally, a court ruled portions of Alberta's personal information protection law unconstitutional, spotlighting ongoing tension between government policies and privacy rights. Join me, FIPA President Mike Larson, Executive Director Jason Waiwata, and legal advisor Samantha De La Chantos of Faskin LLP as we unpack what these developments mean for public transparency and privacy in Alberta.
The judge in this case, Judge Thiesby, did not kind of simply side with one side or the other, and instead took little bits of arguments from both. Clearview AI was making an argument that was incredibly expansive in terms of their authority to collect whatever they wanted, and they had this kind of notion that de facto, by putting anything online and clicking on any consent terms, that anything was available. There was no reasonable expectation of privacy, and the court very much disagreed with that, and instead kind of focused on this issue of freedom of expression. And PIPA's limits on that. There was a quote there. It's at paragraph 147, where the judge says the PIPA regulation is notable for how it fails to grapple with the challenges to privacy posed by the internet with any sensitivity to how the internet works, which I thought was a pretty interesting dig. Essentially, I guess if they were to find in favor of the commissioner here, then by extension, that would also be a finding against the basic functionality of Google, was the argument they're making. And so
for this particular one, yes.
the commissioner hasn't gone after Google, and actually recognizes that, and the court recognizes that Google is perhaps the primary way in which people find information, then there has to be consistency on that front, which I think was really interesting there. So the overall effect of this, then, I guess if we kind of try and bring it home, there's lots of, I think, pieces of this that'll be picked up and explored in future. I mean, decisions around what constitutes expression vis-a-vis scraping. There aren't too many Canadian court cases that really get into, does expression require humans? Or can expression be done exclusively by algorithms? When does an algorithmic kind of bot scraping become a form of expression? So I think that's really interesting kernels of discussion there. But what's the takeaway of this? What does this mean, in your view, for the ability of Clearview AI to continue to function in Canada, continue to function in Alberta? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, and so I guess that kind of turns to the last particular issue, when the court decided that portions to grant this request, that declaring that certain sections of PIPA were unconstitutional and making that amendment to publicly available. They also did restate Clearview still had to have this reasonable purpose, right? Because the fourth aspect of what Clearview were asking for was that the commissioner was unreasonable in determining that Clearview did not have a reasonable purpose to collect, use, disclose this information. And again, going back to that belt and suspenders approach, right? It's like, you may not need the consent, but you still have this reasonable purpose requirement. And so what was interesting in that was the commissioner was declared to be reasonable in their decision as to what that, determining that Clearview did not have a reasonable purpose to collect, use, and disclose the information when they considered all the factors. And so they upheld that decision of the commissioner with regards to reasonable purpose. And as such, on the balance of everything, they came to the decision that even though they made that change to the regulations, they still said that the commissioner's order was valid and would not be struck down. So Clearview was still subject to the commissioner's orders in the end. And what was interesting is that obviously Clearview, when they were talking about the reasonable purpose test, they again cited Google, similar argument to what the constitutional argument was. They said, well, Google's purpose is just to index these images, etc. They're the same as us. but they're allowed to function as they are. And the court really turned to this, well, when we're looking at the purposes, though, Google's purpose is very different to Clearview's purpose. And we are really focusing on Clearview's purpose. And Clearview have not shown us that their purpose is reasonable. Google's is reasonable because, look, they go through index. They provide these functionalities for you to not be subject to indexing if you want. There's procedures that have been set up, and it's for just a very widely different purpose. Clearview, on the other hand, gets these purposes to create this database solely for the use by customers in a commercial context for these very particular purposes, and that is not okay, right? And so the commissioner was right in that decision, and the court had said that's reasonable, and that's why they upheld the order. So it's very interesting to see that they're drawing distinctions between these arguments. They're not just accepting it as a whole and saying, look, because you were successful in arguing, considering Google in the constitutional argument, that we should not side with the commissioner in this particular portion. We're not agreeing to using this argument for this reasonable purpose test. Right now, because they're still subject to the order, Clearview AI are still subject to the restriction on operating in Alberta, even with the court making that decision. So in the near future, they can't continue to operate unless they find ways to comply with that reasonable purpose test still.
Mm-hmm. And we have to remember that going back to the original Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada investigations into this, it was a two-part investigation, right? And we're kind of dealing with the first part, which was the legality of Clearview AI's practices in Canada in the first place under federal and provincial law. But then there was also this question of whether it was lawful for police to use this tool that was presented to them. And in that case, this didn't deal with that. But in part because of the failure to comply with privacy law, the commissioners found that RCMP's use of Clearview AI was itself unlawful in that case. And so that's a separate issue here. So it's kind of an issue on the end of the vendor in terms of the producer of this resource, and an issue on the end of the customer as a public body in this instance under a different law.
As always, we hope today's stories helped you stay informed about the pressing issues surrounding privacy, information management, and transparency. To help keep the mics on, please subscribe to FIBA News Monitoring or consider making a donation. Our writer is Sean Fisk. Original music today was composed by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, your host and producer. Thank you for joining. A big thank you to all our contributors, reporters, and outlets, and especially to you, our listeners, for making this podcast possible. Stay safe and stay informed.